All right, welcome everyone to the Eat Well, Be Well series. So this is week 3. We have one more week coming up, but for today we're going to talk about gut health. We'll also talk a little bit about the immune system or just how to keep that immunity up, especially as we head into these colder months, usually when people aren't outside as often. So we will talk about that as well. So we'll do the discussion first, we'll do questions after, and then a non-competitive quiz just to see what you know. All right. So for the first piece, we'll talk about gut health. And then for the second part, we'll talk about immunity. And then lastly, we will talk about just the action items or the review of what we talked about today and a challenge, which is completely optional. All right, so let's begin. So if it's going to work today, excellent, sweet. All right, so gut health. So we talk about gut health, we talk about how important gut health is, and so let's talk about why. So here we talk about chronic inflammation, which is pretty much a response in the immune system where there's just something inflammatory going on. And that can, be sudden, or happen right away to being something that's very prolonged or extended that happens over months or years. And sometimes people don't realize that there's chronic inflammation going on, from whatever the cause may be. So pretty much it can lead, to chronic stress can be damaging to the cells, to the tissues in the body. The hormones can act upon that and be problematic, especially if we don't reel in our stress. And I know that's hard, just because there's so many things in our lives that can be stress, inducing. And when I say stress, there's different kinds of stress. There's good stress, and then there's bad stress. But the body doesn't really know how to differentiate between the good and the bad. So it's just how we respond to it. So chronic inflammation has been linked to a lot of various health issues and other things that we talk about. So it could be heart disease, diabetes, cancer, obesity, metabolic syndrome, depression, autoimmune disorders, even allergies, strangely enough, can be very inflammatory. So anything that causes inflammation in the body, is inflammatory. So we will move on. All right. So when we talk about, chronic stress, but we talk about like our diet, under like stressful situations, we tend to turn to, certain things, and we'll kind of stick more with like the food piece of it. So it could be sugar, it could be alcohol, like those sorts of things, can, kind of affect, our gut health and affect that chronic inflammation that we talk about. So here we talk about dietary factors such as increased sugar intake and an excessive intake of omega-6s with an insufficient, amount of omega-3s. And so at the that next point, I mentioned that the omega-6s were kind of more from like oils. So not to get confused with saying that oil is bad, but when we cook with a lot of oils, especially if it's like canola oil or soybean oil, or vegetable oil, like those sorts of things tend to be inflammatory, just because either we cook at too high of a heat, and so it's like once that pan starts to smoke, then that's that smoking, that smoking point that you hear about. And so that's where it changes, those healthy components or properties of a oil that have the mono and polyunsaturated fats in them. And so that changes the health benefit of that. And so that's why, that ratio of omega 6s tends to be a lot higher than the omega 3s, where we should really try to get more omega 3s and not as many 6s. And again, 6s aren't bad, but we just overconsume too many of them. All right. So again, omega 3s are coming from cold water fish, avocados, nuts, chia seeds, flax seeds. Those are the omega 3s. So in addition to these dietary factors, we talk about just having a healthy body weight and, trying to decrease, the chronic, inflammation within our body. So as I pause for a moment because I start thinking of two different things. So it's just like when we think of like our joints, like when we talk about arthritis and osteoarthritis, those are inflammatory responses, as well as, when we talk about like excess body fat can be, inflammatory as well. There's something called cellulitis, which is the inflammation of the fat cells in our body. And not everybody has that, but some people do. So let's move on to the next slide. All right. So this is where it gets really fun and juicy. I tried to really kind of take the science out of it just so that it wouldn't be too complex, because when we talk about the gut and we talk about the microbiome of our gut, which would be our stomach, our intestinal tract, that it can be very, very complex. So our gut microbiome is like a second brain, and that second brain can actually like talk to the brain up here in our head. And so it can affect all sorts of things. It can affect your mood, how happy you are, your motivation. Eventually it starts to affect, that performance, that neurological performance later on in life, just again, mentally, how we function. And so when we talk about this, that happiness transmitter, that neurotransmitter, that serotonin that we always talk about, making sure that our serotonin levels are high, again, the happiness piece, that the microbiome is actually producing about 90% of that, that happiness neurotransmitter. So we'll talk about the kinds of foods that are really important when it comes to gut health as we move on. So pretty good, pretty juicy stuff. All right. So the bacteria in your gut, they're always in constant communication between your brain and how it affects your behavior. There are thousands of varieties of bacteria strains, like in your gut. And like I said, your gut is your stomach, your intestinal tract, but there's over 1 million collectively of those bacterial strains that live within the gut. And they are very resilient, but there's so many various factors that affect our gut health. It could be genes within the family. It could be the medications that we take or the antibiotics that we take. And we'll talk about that here shortly too. The environment can be, can affect our gut health, and obviously the stress that we are under. And again, the body doesn't differentiate between the good and the bad, but just making sure that we try to keep that stress dialed in. All right. So when I said that medications can be, can affect our gut health, antibiotics So the anti part is pretty much, it's like we're trying to kill like all the bacteria, that's causing the infection or causing us to not feel well, whether it's a cold or a flu, or we're taking it for high blood pressure or cholesterol. Any sort of medication like that is like a bomb for your gut. So pretty much it can change, how the body responds to certain things. And so it creates this imbalance. Um, so if you're going to be on antibiotics or medication, that's usually good to try to, make sure that you're increasing your probiotic foods. So we'll talk more probiotic foods versus like probiotics, the supplement, just to kind of stay within the scope. Not that probiotic supplements don't have their place, it just becomes even more complex when we talk about it. And so it could be very hit or miss. So we'll just avoid it for the time being. So there are short-term and long-term effects when it comes to, the medications. Your body can bounce back. If you're on, like, let's say if you're just taking 5 days of a medication versus, let's say you've been taking this medication for, months and years, can start to have like actual physical, situations that happen with your metabolism, your immunity, again, your mood, and other things. It's kind of like when you think of like the side effects of being on a medication. All right. So now we start getting into the good stuff, which is talking about the food piece of, the gut health. So probiotics, there's different types of probiotics, but there's also prebiotics, and prebiotics we'll talk about in the next slide. So probiotics are live consumable bacteria, which can help, with certain health benefits, such as improving our immunity, again, something that we'll slightly talk about later, protecting against the bad bacteria against certain infections, and then improving digestion and absorption of the foods that we eat, making sure that we get all the nutrients from those foods. So not all probiotics are the same, and there are so many various strains out there of, different probiotics. Again, I won't get too in depth with that, but just making sure that we're eating a variety of those probiotic type foods. So with these probiotic foods, like we see in this picture, there's yogurts, there's kombucha, there's, apple cider vinegar. Well, in this case, it's more like the kombucha, the kefir, and the yogurt are, the good probiotics. The apple cider vinegar will actually fall into the next slide, which we will talk about right now. All right. So prebiotics are pretty much like they're simply just like fermented things, so like it says in that second bullet point about like the fermentation piece. So that would be things like sauerkraut, strangely enough, like pickles, what else, kimchi, apple cider vinegar, anything that has this whole fermentation piece to it, can be really good for the body. So like it says in the first bullet point, that prebiotics are a fiber that are resistant to digestion in the body. So the whole goal of a prebiotic is to just create a more happier, like more diverse, or like kind of all-inclusive sort of, it's kind of like, having like so many family members to the party, or like your friends. It's just kind of creating this diversity within our stomach, in our intestinal tract that's going to, in the long run, be better for us. All right. So going back down to the second bullet point, that it will benefit in weight loss. It will help decrease inflammation. It will again create more kind of steady, microbiome within our intestinal tract. So there are a lot of health benefits when it comes to probiotic foods and also prebiotic foods. And there is a quiz question about that, just to give you a warning. All right. So we're going back to something that we slightly talked about in the very first week when we talked about, these superpowers with our foods that help protect the body. And so when I had mentioned earlier about fats, that fats were important, for the immune system, but also fats, like in this picture where you see avocados, there are fibers within avocados. If you've ever seen an avocado that you left out for too long, where you get like those little brown, kind of strands throughout your avocado, and then you're like, oh, this is no longer that great, maybe I should toss it. But it's, those sorts of fibers that help kind of, that are very resistant in the body. And so again, good for, for gut health, but also good for immunity. And so again, fats are to protect. They help with the joints, the organs, the hair, the skin. They aid in nutrients, absorption. So it's certain vitamins that are very fat soluble, like vitamin A, D, E, and K. Those are important. And then just a review of making sure that it's keeping you full. It's regulating your blood sugar. It's helping your energy levels, along with just, again, the omega-3s, those poly and mono unsaturated fats are good for, the cardiovascular system as well. All right. So again, brain power, mental clarity, memory, immunity are what omega-3s are great for. All right. I just slightly talked about what, from like 3 or 4 slides back about, the certain fats that were good for you. So again, whether it's, walnuts, pecans, almonds, peanuts, again, the raw piece of those nuts is those nuts have not been roasted or toasted. So there's more nutritional value in raw, but the only weird piece about eating like a raw nut versus like a nut that's been toasted is that it has a little bit more of a chew to it. So that can kind of be slightly, maybe off-putting for somebody who's expecting something crunchy. But again, avocados, nut butters and seed butters, cold water fish, flax seeds, chia seeds, green olives, pumpkin seeds, those sorts of things are important when it comes to, again, gut health, but also the immune system. All right, so we're gonna also retouch back up on, the foods that prevent. So we're starting to like ease our way into the immune system. And so we know that fruits and vegetables are important, as they help prevent, against certain, inflammatory type, pieces, full of antioxidants, vitamins, minerals. Again, they're the support staff with this whole piece of like, that foods are, can have like superpower like benefits to it. So again, aiming for those bright, deep colored, fruits and vegetables. So if we remember from week 1 that the most eaten color out of the, the fruits and veggies, tend to kind of be more of like, the reds and yellows and the like the oranges. But then if we go to the other side of that spectrum, we do get greens in our diet, but those are the more detoxifying. So if you remember the like that piece of, greens are detoxifying, whereas like blue is great for when it comes to like the brain and boosting, that sort of that piece. So like the blueberries and stuff. So blue and purple are the least eaten of the color of the rainbow. So try to aim for at least 3 colors on every plate. And again, don't forget herbs and spices. Those have great beneficial properties as well. So for example, like turmeric can be very anti-inflammatory. Other fruits and veggies that are very anti-inflammatory, if we remember, are leeks, onions, apples, garlic, even though that kind of counts more as like a spice, or an herb, I guess, depending on what part of the garlic plant you're using. But garlic is great for an anti-inflammatory, but also for prebiotic type foods, as I trip over my words this morning. So really good stuff there. So again, leading right into immunity. There aren't too many slides for immunity, but for the immunity piece, so as we get into the colder months, and I know it becomes challenging, especially as we start getting into the string of holidays that can, kind of almost, like we kind of fall into the trap, and myself included, because pretty much from like Halloween all the way through like the end of New Year's, you find yourself, eating, like let's say the Halloween candy, to when we start getting into the family holidays where, like buffet and the feasts, between Thanksgiving and Christmas, kind of, get, when I say shoved in our face, but like, we see it. And so sometimes our eyes get too big for our stomach, and then we overeat, and we maybe eat things that we shouldn't be eating, even though we want to, because, maybe that's something that you crave or something that looks good. So just kind of keeping those things within moderation. So kind of reining back or pulling in the reins back to this immunity piece. So reducing the intake of processed foods, especially things that have hidden or added sugars to them. Again, sugar can be a huge culprit when it comes to the immune system. As much as, drinking a glass of orange juice, and that vitamin C can be helpful, just imagine the concentration of the sugars within that glass of juice. So if you're thinking, oh, well, if I just drink a small glass versus like eating like a whole piece of fruit, I understand the convenience, but just imagine the increase of added sugars in that glass of juice versus not eating as much sugar just from eating a small orange, or like a couple of cuties, or those mandarin oranges. So we definitely do, we do our body better by making sure that we're not consuming too much sugar, especially during the colder months and those holidays. Keeping alcohol consumption to a minimum. So again, some alcohol is fine. Whether it's, having a beer every once in a while, or a 4-ounce glass of wine. Yes, wine is very good for you. Even though I know some people talk about how they feel like side effects from it, but that's a whole nother conversation. Or even like just like it's kind of like having like a shot of like a hard liquor, so like it would be those kind of alcohol in moderation, the serving portions or the sizes that you should allow yourself. All right, so reducing or avoiding trans fatty type foods. will help with your immune system. And a reminder of what those trans fat type foods are. These are things that you would find that tend to be more shelf stable. When we think of like pastries and cakes and, things that are in a box, whether it's crackers or cookies, being watchful of those certain things. So even if a box says that there is 0 grams of trans fat, that from the government standpoint, they could say that something has 0, even though it still may have at least 0.5 grams of trans fat in that particular item, but it doesn't have to be stated on the nutrition label. So with that being said, make sure that we're reading our nutrition labels, becoming aware of what's in the food and what's in the beverages that we consume. Right? See how we're doing on time. We're doing pretty good. All right. So last and not least is the action items or the challenge. Well, and the challenge. All right. So looking for high fiber, foods. Again, when we talked about foods that are good for like, the immune system, when I said that there were like garlic and like apples and onions and such, oatmeal is another good one as well. That can help with the immune system, but also that fiber piece, because fiber is important when it comes to the gut health and the microbiome, because all that bacteria feeds on certain strains of fibers, whether it's like the insoluble fibers that come from, oatmeal, or it's or other fibers that come from like fruits and veggies as well. So keep that in mind. So again, 30 to 35 grams of fiber daily, which I know can be a challenge. But if you split it up, then it doesn't seem so bad. So including a variety of probiotic foods and fermented foods, and then looking to incorporate more omega-3s into your diet. So again, the cold water fish, the walnuts, the chia seeds, the ground flax, those sorts of things. And then last, again, all about those fruits and vegetables, getting those bright colors. Again, trying to aim for 3 colors per plate. And again, try to get more of those blues and those purples and those greens. Even white as well is great for immune health. So if we, again, as a reminder, lots of reminders. So the white foods within that rainbow would be the onions, the cauliflower, the garlic, the parsnips, those sorts of things are your white foods. All right. So again, the same challenge activity, which is completely optional, but just sharing a picture of the meal that you ate that shows kind of what it is that we've talked about for the week 3 for probiotics, prebiotics, gut health, and all that fun stuff.